Welcome everyone. I'll just kick it off, and the fun part around demos will sound like 5 minutes, so we can start a bit. Where generally during this town hall, it was a lot of fun during launch week 1. Now almost like a little bit more than half a year ago, we released a ton of new features and were able to basically reintroduce what Langfuse is actually doing, because we started out initially mostly focusing on LM application observability with launch week 1 in April, really extended more into the whole workflow with regards to evals and data sets. But all of these capabilities were kind of early. And now launch week 2 changes this. So during this town hall, I want to touch on the themes of this launch week, what kind of new features we released. I'll demo the top 3 of Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, give you a sneak peek of what's happening until Friday. Then we can touch on what Langfuse v3 means for everyone on Langfuse Cloud and self-hosting and the current update of this project. And then at the end, touch on roadmap and do Q&A. The last time, half a year ago, I think half of the session was like super engaged Q&A at the end. And so whenever you have questions, either feel free to interrupt me during the first part, or use this Q&A feature by Google Meet, which you should be able to see on the bottom right of the screen, where these kind of like triangle, square, and circle icons are. There should be Q&A, so you can like lock down questions, and we can like collaboratively upvote and touch on them during the second half of the town hall. So first of all, thank you everyone for contributing so many ideas and questions to the project. We've been super lucky to build with this community, are now by many metrics one of the largest open source projects in the space. And a lot of it comes down to you contributing to the ideas section within GitHub discussions, which really drives a lot of the roadmap of the project. And also by using the support threads in GitHub discussions to easily find questions that have already been asked, interact with the Dosu bot to get like quick answers. And then all of this is resurfaced again on the Langfuse documentation again, which just makes the doc so much better for everyone new discovering the project. So thanks for using the discussions. We really love it from like a team perspective. And when talking about team, the team has grown a bit since the last town hall, where I think we were still like 2 people fewer, where currently there's Marc, that's me. I'm one of the co-founder and CEO. There's Max, co-founder and CTO, focusing a lot on the infrastructure and backend systems. Clemens, who is co-founder and COO, focusing on like go-to-market, marketing, documentation, to really reach more developers out there, do great partnerships, because this market is quickly growing, and thereby like helping to educate about the space is really important for us. Then Hasib joined earlier this year, focused a lot on the integration. So if you report GitHub issues or requests regarding any of our SDKs or integrations, you probably talked with him. Malise shipped a lot of the UI-based features that you will have seen then during this launch week, as she pushes for a lot of the like in-UI experience to really close the loop from production. Yannick, who's also in this call, drives a lot of like our go-to-market efforts, tons of documentation pages, and generally just like a product without docs or without docs documentation, or without being listed in like other projects documentations, like it doesn't exist. So Yannick is driving a lot of the growth that we see. And Stefan, who joined us recently, focused a lot on the backend engineering and scalability of the platform, and drives a ton of the version 3 project, which is a very infrastructure-heavy project. And also about the last half year, we're excited to see that overall like adoption metrics have kind of skyrocketed. I have no idea what the goal would have been until end of this year, but by no means we would have assumed to land at like 2 million Docker pulls or over 3 million SDK installs per month. With like logos such as Twilio, Khan Academy, Samsara, who we really enjoy working with. So yeah, thank you everyone. This has been like a really exciting year for us. So after the thank you of 5 minutes, which hopefully helped many people to join, I want to touch on what happened now during this week, launch week 2, where Langfuse extends its capabilities to support the next generation of models and to be more closely involved in the development loop. We put on these two topics, and Yannick generated these images for them, where it was more about what's the theme of this? Because in the end, a launch week for us is time to invest into documentation, to get features out that are 90% ready for a long time, to then finally release them, and also to just work with every one of you to get feedback on these as the features are released, because then they're eyeballs on, oh, what's new? Let's try this out. Generally, as Langfuse started, we focused a lot on observability to just understand step by step what's happening with an LLM application and what's going well, what's going poorly. Initially optimized for production, but then realized many people use this in development. Then in Q1, Q2 this year, extended more broadly into the development workflow, but it's a really SDK-heavy, developer-focused tool. Because, for example, data sets and everything that's happening for offline evaluation was very developer-focused. And during this launch week, we do something on the model side, but also go way deeper into the development loop. That's why you've seen us launch a lot of new UI and SDK experiences focused at prompt iterations, data sets experiments, comparing different data sets, evaluating data set experiments runs, which is basically our concept for development time benchmarking data sets to know whether things improve or not before you go to prod. So without further introduction, I would basically show you what was already released quickly and give you a super quick tour of what has happened already this launch week. Where, first of all, on Sunday, we built or released the integration of Langfuse prompt management for the Vercel AI SDK integration, which is very exciting because the Vercel AI SDK, from our perspective, draws in a lot of very experienced and good teams who build exciting new front-end experiences. As it's I'd say a light abstraction that solves the hard parts without being too opinionated or hiding a lot of the magic. So it's very simple to use to just, for example, generate text and then have a nice React hook to consume it again. So we've seen a lot of adoption there. And now finally, it's also interoperable with Langfuse prompt management in a sense of that you can connect the traces created by the Vercel AI SDK and connect them directly to prompt management to understand how metrics change as you change prompts with Langfuse. The Vercel AI SDK has under the hood, it's using OpenTelemetry, and linking it with Langfuse to collect traces is very simple because you basically just need to enable experimental telemetry and then basically enable the instrumentation hook and create the Langfuse exporter. So it's very minimal on a global level and should just work. But there are also more customization options, as with any of our integrations that I explained in the documentation. And then with regards to the prompt linking, this is an example trace of how a Langfuse trace works and on a generation object. If the trace is linked, you basically can see the prompt version that was used to create this LLM call within this execution of the application. So basically, if we see this conversation, I have 3 metrics based how to integrate in Langfuse. If we go to the trace, we see this interaction had a couple of interactions. One was the LLM call, and this LLM call then used this prompt version. We jump to prompts, see this prompt version, and down here also see the list of basically invocations that use this prompt, and can, if we link it correctly, can see metrics basically by prompt version, which helps us understand how things have changed over time. So this is prompt linking, and overall prompt management has seen a lot of traction over the last year, where teams basically on the engineering side use this as an interface to develop against a productionized application, while domain experts or product managers can iterate on prompts without ever needing to touch code. Then coming to day one, with a theme of improving data sets in general, we launched the dataset experiment run comparison view, which helps show data sets experiments side by side. I'll give you a super brief example here, where we have our favorite development data set, which is so simple to explain in a demo, where the input is just countries and the expected output are the capitals. And in development, we did a couple of iterations with different prompt versions. we ask for like the famous city, we directly ask for the capital, and we ask specifically. And now we see that metrics basically change over the different experiments. Back before this launch week, we would then need to go in and basically review these items to understand what the issue is. But often when we do an experiment, it's not like better in all regards, but it's kind of like better at some things, but worse at others. So now with this change, we can just select different runs that we did in development and then view them side by side, which helps to review what's really going on here. Meaning, for example, with Egypt and Cairo, we could now see that for these 3 different experiments that we did, that, for example, directly asked yielded Cairo, but like a full like sentence. Or more interestingly is maybe like South Africa, where Pretoria would be the expected output, but we got like Pretoria executive capital like a sentence, and famous city is just Johannesburg, where now we can also go in, see this kind of like peak view, which we'll extend throughout the product over the next weeks to really help like be more in flow while navigating data in the UI. We can now see the different things side by side again with their metrics, but it's always linked back to the trace. So if we wanted to, we can basically then open the trace that led to this example. You can now see it. Okay, perfect. I was confused by my browser. So now we can see the trace that led to this example that we saw in the data set. So this is the comparison view. And we'll add more UI and generally like experiences in UI with like charts to compare them over the next weeks. Then finally, on the dataset side, there's like elements of judge evaluators now, where historically for datasets, you needed to create the evaluations at runtime. And I'll quickly open the documentation to show you where in datasets get started. Like, how do we do a dataset run? We basically run an experiment as a loop on a dataset. So we get the dataset, get the item, and then run our application for every item. And then we can add custom scores. This is great if we, for example, want to compare 2 different JSON objects, like the expected JSON and the JSON we got from our application, in like an extraction use case, like something where like it's easy in code to determine whether the output was good. But then, as in production, there are many kind of problems that can be solved via LLM as a judge, where you use an LLM to evaluate this. Until now, you would need to use like a library within this kind of CI code or in your local notebook to test things. And now with this change, you can use the LLM as a judge evaluators, which are available within the Langfuse platform, also for data sets. And I'll give you like a super brief tour of how this works. You can create a new LLM as a judge evaluation template in Langfuse. For example, let's take correctness, because it's just, I already did it, so I can show you the end result at the end. Where correctness is an evaluation where we basically, it's like a few-shotted prompt where we take the user input, the query, we have the generation, so our output of the application, we have some kind of ground truth. This is like specific about datasets experiments, where we usually have a ground truth for the different inputs, which makes it different from the basically production evaluation that was possible until today with Langfuse LLM as a judge. So this is our template. We can use any model that's supported by Langfuse, which is currently OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, Anthropic, or AWS Bedrock. And for example, via Light LLM or some kind of application proxy, LLM proxy, you can also via the OpenAI provider then use virtually like any model, as long as it supports tool calling to extract the evaluation metrics at the end. Here you can just provide the label for the tool call, which makes the LLM usually adhere very specifically to this output. So like, for example, if you have a scale that you wanted to adhere to or want to prompt the reasoning to go into a certain detail, you can customize all of this. And by the way, this was just like a template to get you started more easily. We could easily also like edit the whole prompt and iterate on it. Once we have a template, we can set up an evaluator, and this is what's new now. So when we select correctness, we can select data sets, select a data set, any of, select the data set that we created, and now map the data set against this evaluator, where, for example, for correctness, we have query, which would be like the data set item input. So in our example, the country. Generation would be the trace output. And here, by the way, as in LLM as a judge for production data, you can also pick something which is deeply nested in your trace. So you want to evaluate more like a single step within your agent or chain, you could then like query from this kind of like nested data structure that that is the trace. But here, I mean, it's just the trace output. And ground truth, we can take the dataset item expected output. We could add a sampling rate, which doesn't really make sense in offline experiments and datasets, but it's rather meant for production. And we can add a delay, which just helps if the agent or application is very long. So we wait long enough after the initial trace event was received by Langfuse for that we know that we got all of the trace data. 20 seconds should be fine. This is very simple. So I've already created this. And when we run this experiment, we can see here that we have a divergence between exact match, which is like 50% and then 100%, and correctness, which is our eval we ran in Langfuse of like 52, 98, and 100%. So let's have a look at these two to get an understanding of how this helps. So action compare. For example, I mean, we talked about this one before. Oh, which one is better? This one here, for example, would be good, where we got Argentina and Buenos Aires. And during our dataset run, we do an exact match eval, which just does string comparison exact match. So we see Buenos Aires, okay, exact match, 100%, perfect. But here, because we got a sentence, it's 0. But we now have a correctness eval, which takes this output and based on this ground truth evaluates whether this is correct. And I mean, it's factually correct. It's just not an exact match. And if we go to the trace, we'll also see the comment of the reasoning where we got the LM reasoning that this matches the ground truth exactly. Therefore, it's like 100%, like it's factually supported by the ground truth. This is a very simple example. I mean, why is this interesting? Basically, now you can set up the LM as a judge evaluators in Langfuse, connect them to a data set, then have domain experts of the whole team collaborate on the items that you actually want to develop on. So basically, the items are like mutually managed here. And then any developer on your team can run new experiments by just pulling the data set and using this utility that I just shown you, where we take the data set and then loop over it to do the data set run. And this works across all of our integrations. We want to further improve the documentation here. So if you have any questions, please reach out via GitHub, and I'll make sure that we get to improve the documentation, that it's all just makes sense. So finally, the biggest one that was, I think, the request with the most upvotes on GitHub is today, I think like 1 hour ago, we released like full multimodal support, including audio, images, and attachments. And I want to show you a couple of things that are interesting here. So if we go to the changelog, we can first of all see the GitHub discussion thread, where if we go in here, thank you, everyone. This is what I meant at the beginning of the conversation. I mean, Marlies just put this out here after releasing initial multimodal support for image URLs. And since then, we got like 45 different upvotes, 15 participants on the thread who mentioned what they want, how like their kind of requirements changed. This is really helpful. It just helps to see what people actually want to do with these features when contributing to them, when reviewing PRs. So this is super helpful. If we go back to multimodal, I want to show you some details here in the documentation, where Langfuse now supports images. Maybe just show you some screenshots first off. We can see images. We can play audio inline, and like basically arbitrary file attachments, such as like PDF text files. Available on Langfuse Cloud and self-hosting today. If you self-host, you just need to basically supply like S3 credentials, but this should work across Azure, GCP, or MinIO if you self-host outside of a major cloud provider. Yes, so we support major media formats. If you have any feedback on this, please contribute to the GitHub discussion thread. This is very active in development, but this scope is tested now and should work well because we ran many tests on it. So high level, there are 4 ways to use multimodal tracing in Langfuse, where once we have base 64 encoded media, where, for example, we have some examples here, where, for example, with OpenAI Vision, we have this base 64 string, same for audio. where this is not OpenAI specific, the integration. All of the Langfuse SDKs now at a very low level detect basically this URL, this data URL, extract it from the overall trace payload, upload it to S3 independently, and then link it back to the trace, which makes this very scalable also to large media attachments. So generally, these are extracted when you run them. And next to it, you can also supply external media files. This was what was released in August, where either, for example, in Markdown content, you can just reference a public image URL, or if you use, for example, OpenAI or other models that allow for image URLs, if you add like an image URL in like a recognized kind of like schema, then the Langfuse UI will render it even though it's not like a Langfuse media file. It's just like an external image. And then there's also the possibility to use custom attachments, meaning, for example, we here have like a Python example that uses the observe decorator. And we use the Bitcoin white paper that we read just like as content bytes. And when we wrap it with Langfuse Media, which helps to set the content type, we can lock this on any update current trace or update current observation call, which then ends up then as an attachment in Langfuse, which then looks like this. So you see the media file, and when you click on it, you get like a present URL to view it in a new tab. And finally, this is also available via the API. So if you've built your own integration API-based, we have a new route, which is this post public media route, where if you post like the hash and the mim type of your file, you'll get a media ID and a present URL to which you can then upload the media file. And finally, these kind of files then, because it's very important that from this kind of trace plus S3 kind of object, we can get back to the original like string representation of, for example, the LLM call, then, for example, for fine-tuning. So this change introduces like some sort of Langfuse media token, which is basically an extension of the data URL, but which also includes the Langfuse media ID and some source types. So, for example, there we can know that this was a base64 data URI and can then reconstruct it, for example, for exports in the future. Yeah, so this works extremely well. We have this end-to-end Python notebook, which is also available in our documentation. And this is how it looks like. So we got like cute dog pictures now in Langfuse. So we can see that this is a cute dog. We can get audio files, which are rendered within the UI, including transcripts if they follow the, this is the OpenAI schema, where here we can see the, like this reference string that I just mentioned, and can play the audio. And for attachments, here, for example, we have the like Python example using the decorator, where we see again the string representation and can open the PDF in a new tab. Awesome. So this was overall Langfuse Launch Week 2 so far. Now the question is, what's coming tomorrow and Friday? On Friday, we also launch on Product Hunt again, which I'm very much looking forward to, because the last 2 times this was always like a great way to get new people exposed to the project, and generally growing the project is a good thing to help improve it. Friday is definitely like one of the largest feature releases we probably ever did with regards to like the UI experience, because we currently do a lot of like prompt engineering in the UI, but you always need this kind of SDK level runner to run against the data set. So on Friday, we'll release that you can directly in the UI, when you change a prompt, can then get instant feedback on a data set, whether your prompt iteration actually improved things or whether you will cause regressions with the change that you're planning to make. Initially, when releasing data sets, we assumed the data sets need to be like kind of like an integration, at like an integration level where you can run a whole application, which is like multi-step. But increasingly, we see that as it matures, you want to basically like a single step within a larger application, and then for the single step, have like a data set that like maps inputs and output expectations, so you can like prompt engineer on a single step without ever leaving Langfuse. So no more needing to create like a GitHub action with like an HTTPS like URL that you can send around in your team that people like click or something. So yeah, this is like a really big one. I'm really, really excited for it. And this is also the first time where Langfuse will create traces server side. And we will be able to extend this to other Langfuse features as well. So for example, Langfuse Elements Judge, where it's interesting to debug things under the hood, or to also the playground, where basically seeing your historical playground uses is interesting as well. Some extra goodies. We have now an element.txt file. There's a new doc start page. There's a new self-hosted pro plan because some of these additional UI features come currently under like a commercial license, because all of the core tracing, core prompt management, core data sets, basically everything that's API bound, and 95% of our work is MIT licensed. And there are some add-on UI features which for now we're basically behind like an enterprise plan, which for us meant like enterprise guarantees, SLAs, like lots of meetings. And we just have like such a big community of really sophisticated teams which would like to contribute also financially to the project and engage with us without needing like enterprise support. So now this is just basically self-serve. And if you go to the pricing page, you see like basically 95% of Langfuse is all open source, no limits, no kneecaps. We see a ton of projects basically driving everyone to the cloud product. And we feel basically adding everything to the open source version that is very API bound. So you can build your basically platform around Langfuse without like worrying about it being commercial is very important to us. So you can really own the data. And then there are some in-UI features such as the playground, elements judge evaluation, and the human annotation queues, which are like nice in-UI add-ons, but not like really like crucial to the experience, because you could build them outside of Langfuse. You will probably if you have like a very, very, very sophisticated or specific use case. So this is like the split where we draw the line between fully open source, giving away everything to the community, and where we find ways to work commercially with the teams that use Langfuse the most to then fund the project as well. So going back to this, and finally, this also leads me to the like next step of today's town hall. There's like an update on Langfuse version 3. It's running on Langfuse Cloud. We see great performance across dashboards. Like all of the tables show like a similar performance as before, but like search and filters on large sets of data and like aggregating metrics has really improved. A developer preview is available since late last week if you self-host Langfuse and want to give it a try. It's not recommended for production yet, and we expect a GA release for self-hosting like late November, early December. Quick recap, what is Langfuse version 3 for everyone who's hearing about this for the first time? First of all, if you run on Langfuse Cloud, like you don't really need to worry about it. It's basically just makes the product faster. And you will see a lot of like analytics capabilities that develop within Langfuse that weren't possible before when Langfuse was running mostly on Postgres. We can have a quick look into the GitHub discussion, which gives us a quick chart. This is basically like the big change that we see, where before Langfuse was a single Docker container in a Postgres database, extremely easy to self-host, extremely easy for us to maintain, but also like very limited with regards to scalability, and then like having performant reads for in-UI experiences. Now with version 3, which is already live on Langfuse Cloud and which will be released to everyone self-hosting, basically we add another container to the deployment, which helps with scalability. Add ClickHouse for analytical reads, because it's basically the best-in-class open source OLAP-DB, and a Redis queue as like a read-through cache and a simple queue. In the end, the APIs all don't change, meaning like if you use Langfuse and you upgrade, like it's like an operational problem of upgrading, but it doesn't change how you interact with Langfuse with the application, and also the UI doesn't change short-term, but it just unblocks many features which are currently which we either can't build or where we can't release them for everyone self-hosting because they need basically this infrastructure. So you'll see hopefully way better resource use and more scalability for self-host if you switch to Langfuse version 3. Generally, we have like thousands of teams self-hosting this, so there will be a ton of documentation. Steffen already started with this. So basically, we have a preview out since late last week, which gives an overview about the components, some diagrams, and really like a rundown of how this works. A migration guide, because somehow the data needs to be migrated to the new setup, and also guides for Docker Compose locally, or like on a single VM, and a Helm chart. Yeah, so this is coming out. I'm super excited about it. Happy to take questions at the end about this, because this is like the biggest change that ever happened in like the Langfuse project history so far. But again, nothing really changes besides it becoming faster, and we can build cool features. Before closing out, there are a couple of big roadmap items that are coming up. Just wanted to give you like a sneak peek. Like generally now we have like a lot of new capabilities, so you will be able to see more like data platform kind of features around how via like rule engines or workflows you can route between the different features. Because for example, like a very common workflow that we see is you have like production instrument with Langfuse, you have user feedback, production evals, maybe domain experts reviewing data from production, and you have a development data set. And now what you actually want to do is, for example, whenever like a user reports that something didn't work and you attach user feedback to a trace, you want to have a rule in Langfuse to route these traces automatically into a review queue. So for example, a domain expert or yourself can go in, label the data. And then, for example, when a labeler decided that this was actually like a bug, then route it to someone else who then comes up with like a golden response, which is then added to a data set to continuously have a data set that mirrors what's happening in production. This also includes like filters to then, for example, trigger webhooks. Generally, just this kind of sense of things are happening in Langfuse, and it'd be cool to have like downstream consumers in Langfuse or externally via webhooks. Then we'll add more native support for different tracing environments, which are currently often split into different projects within an organization, but which make using Langfuse prompt management datasets like more difficult than it needs to be. So Langfuse tracing within a single project will have support to like split between environments. Then organizational level API keys, which will help if you have, for example, one organization Langfuse with like 10 projects of different use cases, and you want to dynamically route traces or fetch prompts from different projects within the same organization. When is this helpful? Often then when, for example, we have like a multi-tenancy application as, for example, like an agency, but you want to give each customer also access to the Langfuse project for like RBAC. Thereby, you could now have like a single organization level API key, which automatically routes to the separate projects of your different tenants, invite your customers to every project, but still have your application integrate once with the like whole set of projects that you maintain in Langfuse. There are many of these workflows that need organization level API keys, so I'm very excited about it. And like the largest teams we work with, like this is like one of the most common requests. Then more fine-grained access and data retention management, which is now possible due to Langfuse version 3. So so basically, for example, having custom roles, like who can deploy a prompt to prod, like all of these kind of workflows that matter if you scale Langfuse in your team and as your use case matures. And as we now are like an analytical database, we can finally work on more flexible dashboards to help you drill down on data and make sense out of like high volumes or large volumes of production data. So like, for example, I mean, in the end, it should look like something like Tableau or Looker, but I mean, we are doing also other things than dashboarding. But this is basically the core goal, like flexible dashboards on data in Langfuse without needing to use the API. Currently, while I'm running on Postgres, this is really hard because we need to basically optimize indices in the database for every single dashboard that we have. With this change, switching to ClickHouse, like this will become way easier. Perfect. Thanks again for the great discussion on GitHub and Discord, all the contributions, detailed bug reports, very appreciated. And yeah, let's do some Q&A together. So generally, again, how to do for everyone who joins in the meantime, how to do Q&A in Google Meet. Either just unmute yourself and start talking. But if you feel uncomfortable to talk on this call as it's recorded, you can also open the Q&A box on the bottom right corner and add questions to the call. And I'll just wait for a second if someone wants to just unmute, and otherwise take questions from the chat and from the Q&A widget. Awesome. So I'll start with the chat, where Lucas is asking, are these beta features or some of them also available in the self-host Docker version? Basically, everything that we released this week, generally there should be no difference between Langfuse Cloud and self-hosted Pro by beginning of December, because currently we don't withhold features from self-hosting. They just need some of the infrastructure components. Where, for example, if you want to run elements of Judge evaluations, you need a queue and some kind of management of running these evals. They don't work within the single Docker container that also serves the front end. So that's why they're currently not available. But these will all be available on the self-hosted version early December as well. And many of these are available in the open source version, where, for example, all of these kind of dataset UI components, or the prompt integration with the AI SDK, all of these are open source features. Elements of Judge evaluators in Langfuse is a commercial feature, as mentioned before. So, but it's available for self-hosting early December. Then Kranti is asking, many platforms are promoting prompt modification enhancements. Any thought on that? Generally, I think I'm excited about either meta prompting for prompts to help come up with a good first example of a prompt, or to use something like DSPy. I think for most teams, having meta prompts create prompts is helpful, especially when a domain expert should prompt engineer without being a prompting expert. So then having a meta prompt that helps create a good prompt for a smaller model is usually helpful. If you're good at prompt engineering, I think there's not that much of an upside in it, but it's exciting for many people. With a more data sets based experience in Langfuse and some in-UI prompt experiments where we directly get a feedback of how the evaluations changed. In UI, hitting a button and Langfuse comes up with prompt version and does basically a grid search. It's a really interesting extension of this feature, which I'm excited about to explore. Probably initially we'll create a notebook of how to run this externally and then see results in Langfuse, as Langfuse works with DSPy. But yeah, I think an in-UI experience for this would also be really cool. Then Simon is saying, nice, really good to hear about the Friday launch. Big missing piece in having domain experts help on iterating quickly on prompts. Okay, thanks. Great to hear this. Sorry, I didn't read that it wasn't a question. And then Divakar is asking, I'm using Langfuse in my RAG pipeline. May I know scores that we'll get from the datasets, or we can find directly with the trace? I hope I can answer the question. I'm not sure whether I understand it correctly. Basically, Langfuse works in that way where you have a data set with the items of your test cases. Then you run your application against the data set, where on every item, basically, your trace is created for what's actually happening at test time. But thanks to the SDK integration, generally, you don't have additional pollution of production code, because it just reuses for example, decorator that you added for production instrumentation. And then during test time, when you run an experiment on data sets, basically just evaluations can be attached to the traces, which are then rolled up and aggregated and analyzed in the dataset view. So it just reuses all of the production tracing and evaluation data logic. And also this week we did a lot of changes of the documentation. So if you haven't been to the Langfuse documentation in a time and have used Langfuse for some time, I would probably recommend to just visit langfuse.com/docs right after this call and browse a bit, because I think a lot of the features are now way better discoverable. And yeah, I'm very excited about the docs changes we made ahead of this launch week. Then Arjun is asking, when you hit a usage limit on Langfuse, do you no longer allow prompts to be downloaded? That would be painful because one has no control over the timing. Generally, the Langfuse, two things. If you're on Langfuse Cloud, the Langfuse prompt API has no strict API rate limits on it, as it's extremely efficient server-side, meaning it's all cached, it just serves from Redis. That's why we decided that it's like it shouldn't be rate limited. If you see errors on this API, please let us know, as we closely monitor them. So you should not hit limits there. And also the SDKs, since I think like August, September, do a lot of like caching client side, meaning like the prompt should be served instantly and then just revalidated in the background, meaning if you hit a limit, I don't know, ISP, DNS, like something happening in the on the network side, or Langfuse is down, I don't know, things happen, then you should still have the prompt available immediately. So generally, like fetching prompts should never be limited. Arjun would love to get more context on this. If you, can you please double check? I got an issue with rate limit yesterday. Can you like just ping me via Discord on this? Happy to have a look at this after the call and like check with Max, because generally there should never be like rate limits on this. And also, like if there are, then these are like the like DDoS protection cloud level ones, which you should probably never hit, as like the Langfuse prompt management SDKs, like they usually serve from a cache and they don't like fetch prompts every time you use them. Then Arjun's next question is, can you please integrate with an LLM for edits, like basic proofreading, showing differences, reduce the number of versions iterating? I think this is all about the like in-UI prompt creation experience of how to come up with a good prompt. I'm excited about like using LLMs to like prompt for prompts, where now that we will be able to run experiments on prompts in the UI, it makes way more sense to help create more prompt versions. And also we got a lot of feedback over, I think, the last 2 weeks that, for example, investing more into the prompt viewing experience or editor experience of when it's XML, that it should be like collapsible, or how indentation can be managed if it's like JSON. So this is very interesting to go deeper on this over the next weeks. So yes, Arjun, I'm excited about this, about somehow helping iterate on prompts, because currently what I'm doing, I like Raycast AI on now the new ChatGPT Mac app, and I basically just copy paste from there. But I agree that it would be really useful if you do this in Langfuse and like instantly see responses. I think a very good thing here, like I really like the Anthropic workbench and what these guys have done on the prompt iteration. Yeah, Arjun, I would really appreciate your feedback on the things we launched Friday. What you think about it? Leo is asking, would there ever be a future where we can manage prompts in our code base or with BAML? I like BAML. My understanding is that it's kind of like there's some kind of like compile time, or I don't know whether it's actually compile, but some kind of iterate, like there's something happening before it's running. I think using Langfuse prompt management with usually there's like 2 things. Either you are like a developer and you want to use like prompts in code and version it in Git, like for example us, where the full all of the team is technical, and then like we don't need like a UI or CMS to manage prompts if like a prompt isn't edited a whole lot. Or you have like a team where non-engineers are involved in iterating on prompts, and engineering focuses more on the prioritization of the use case, and like domain experts or the PMs or whoever basically is on the team in charge of prompts can iterate on prompts without ever touching code. So that's what prompt management is meant for. Leo, I would really appreciate if you create like a new thread on GitHub, langfuse.com/ideas, with what you'd like to see, where you think Langfuse prompt management could help you while you want to still have prompts in your code base or use BAML for them. Final question from the chat, and then I'll try to move over to the other section of the Q&A. Where Divakar is saying, for the evaluation, we need query, context, and an AI answer. But if we use GPT, then how can we get context there? Some matrices that we will miss. Also, if you, the data set, then we cannot trace our live reg app. Divakar, I don't really understand the question. It would be really helpful if you create a thread for it on langfuse.com/support, and I can help you figure this out. One extension that we plan with regards to Elmer's Judge evaluators is basically that you can also add some kind of JSON path to how you extract data from a trace, which then helps if, for example, you have like a context object that you retrieve that you can, for example, always take like choices 0 or like only the title of the document that you retrieve to be more specific about what you insert into the elements judge prompt, because currently all of the input, all of the output, or all of the metadata is inserted, which is a bit limited. So this is coming. Maybe this answers your question. I'm not 100% sure. And then in Q&A, Ulrich is asking, is it possible to do comparisons of LLM tool call inputs based on tool descriptions in order to optimize tool descriptions, which could be seen as the system prompt of a tool? Yes, 100%. So this is not something that will work within the UI, because you kind of then still need the rest of the kind of like prompt next to tool descriptions. But you can use datasets for it. So I would recommend to have a look at the datasets get started guide, which I think is, like, since this week, easy to follow. It wasn't before. And there you could then, for example, have a data set of the different example inputs and outputs, and then iterate on whether, for example, the tool descriptions yield the right tool selection, which is something we hear very frequently, like, is the right tool selected? Are the right like input parameters set for the tool? So dataset should definitely work for it. And if you have follow-up questions on this, feel free to ask via langfuse.com/support. And if we then realize together that there are some kind of capabilities missing, we can like iterate on it together in like an idea thread. I know that right now, Langfuse prompt management and the playground, like we currently lack like explicit functional tool support and rely on in prompt management on this config object. We plan to add tool calling support also to prompt management and thereby also the playground, because in like this kind of data set driven experimentation on prompts is that much more relevant with structured output, where with structured output you usually have like very clear expectations, large data sets, often like extraction, for example, workflows. So a lot of the data sets experiment workflows are actually like structured data outputs. So yeah, we'll add support for function calls and structured output to prompt management, thereby also to playground, and thereby also to these kind of experimentation capabilities that we add on Friday. Juan is asking, is it possible to enable multiple users to annotate the same trace independently? No, not yet. We talked about it with a couple of teams with whom we iterated on the annotation queuing feature. I think even though this was something that popped up initially, this is currently not tracked yet on GitHub discussions. So we'd really appreciate if you take the time to write the thread on langfuse.com/ideas, so we can examine it together and track how many people are interested in it and see whether we can find a workaround. Because, for example, what you could do today is, no, you couldn't. Sorry, I think I can't think of like a very obvious workaround that works today. Would love to just continue the conversation on GitHub and see how we can maybe make it work, or how difficult it is to basically add more native support for like having multiple labelers review the same trace to then see whether the labelers actually agree. In the meantime, what we've seen with many teams, that they invest a lot into the descriptions of the different labels within Langfuse, because thereby the scale is more clear, which then helps basically have some kind of like reliability of the labeling results. But yeah, in the end, having 3 people label the same thing is just better. And like currently, Jamil, with the new evaluation compare feature, does this only compare datasets, or can you compare individual runs within a dataset? This is only the latter. So you can only compare runs within a dataset. Basically, you take a dataset with multiple runs, and then you can see for the different experiments that you did on the same dataset side by side how the different experiments compared next to each other. So basically, I can just show it again from earlier. If we go in here and go to the dataset capital cities, we see that we have different runs. We can select them, hit compare, and then every row is basically an item in the dataset, and the different experiments are columns, and thereby we can see how, for example, on like South Africa, we performed differently across the different experiments, and then can still like open it to have a deep dive, and then can open the trace, which is now open in a new tab. So here's the trace. So you can still see the trace that's basically ran within this experiment. If you have questions or feedback on this, very happy to help. Very excited about this new feature. And Kelly is asking, we work around that with annotations per user, naming conventions. Regarding the like having multiple people review the same thing. So if Juan and Kelly, if both of you can jump into langfuse.com/ideas and one of you creates the thread first, I would love to continue the conversation after this town hall to just see how we can maybe solve this more easily, and can also track the workaround that Kelly found, which might help other people as well. Where I think since the last town hall, I'm very excited how we now then make the effort of actually posting on GitHub discussions like that much more helpful. Where, for example, if we take, I don't know, what should I do? Let's do datasets. Where, for example, for datasets, the Langfuse documentation now also exposes these support questions of, for example, delete. So we find like deleting duplicate items in a data set, or we can also see the most upvoted like idea posts with regards to the individual feature. So basically, we try to be very responsive on GitHub discussions and apply labels, which then help to resurface all of this in the documentation again. By the way, all of this is open source, so if you run like a dev tool or need this for your own project, feel free to copy paste or reach out, as this has been extremely helpful to scale how like we as core maintainers and also some contributors like interact with all of the community while not being completely flooded in basically support questions, because generally Langfuse is extremely flexible, and I'm very happy how many of you figure out how to make this very useful for your project, even though like when getting started, it might be a little bit complicated to actually navigate the data model and then realize what you can do with it end to end. So every time I chat with some of you or someone screen shares something, I'm often very impressed by that this is basically doable based on the current documentation. So yeah, very thankful for it. Okay, do we have more questions? Also, again, feel free to unmute yourself if you just want to chat. But please note, you'll be on the recording. Otherwise, let's give it like 10 seconds. Otherwise, thanks everyone for joining. This was fun. You'll find the recording on YouTube, probably maybe tomorrow, maybe on Friday. I don't know whether we want to like make Friday less exciting for everyone who hasn't joined the town hall. But yeah, thanks everyone. This was fun. Generally, we can't be more excited. Like so many things happening. And I'll just pop up the initial slide again, where, I don't know, like just knowing that when you push code, it's like installed 3 million times a month is kind of so wild. And I'm very excited. Final note, if you know someone, if you have a good friend, or if you tend to live in Europe, feel free to reach out. We are like opportunistically hiring on like product engineering, more like I'd say like design engineering, or more front-end focused, also on the infra level, and in like technical go-to-market. So generally, if you find like these kinds of problems to be very exciting, feel free to reach out. We see a ton of traction, are well capitalized by some of the best investors. And yeah, generally just enjoy what we're working on. This is the best team I've ever worked with. So it's very fun, and the best community. So if there's no other question, I would suggest that we close the session, and we'll see each other next time. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.